All right, let's dive into something really fascinating. We're going to break down a scientific report that asks a pretty wild question. Can you actually change the properties of water without even touching it? So that's the big question, right? Can an object alter water without any physical contact? I mean, that's a claim that really pushes up against what we think we know about physics. And it's exactly what one European research institute decided to put to the test, using some seriously rigorous methods. So who's involved here? Well, the client was a company called Lila Quantum Tech. They're the ones with the product. And they went to a research group called the BION Institute, which, specializes in exactly this kind of thing. So the stage is set. You've got a product making a big claim and a scientific body ready to test it.
And here's a look at the institute we're talking about, the BION Institute. They're based out of Slovenia, and they're an officially registered research organization. Their whole thing is bioelectromagnetism, which is basically the study of how living things and electromagnetic fields interact. So they've got the scientific chops for the kind of experiment we're about to dig into.
Okay, let's talk about the setup. How in the world do you test something you can't see? The report calls it a subtle field. You can't just stick a thermometer in it, right? This is where having a really, really clever experimental design is everything. It's the only way you're going to get a result you can trust.
And this right here is the heart of the whole experiment. On the left, you've got the real deal, the Super Bloc. But on the right, you have what they call a sham product. It looks exactly the same, but it's totally non-functional. It's a placebo. By comparing the water that's been exposed to each, the sham acts as the control. It lets the scientists see what, if anything, the real product is actually doing. Now, this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, super professional. They wanted to make sure there was absolutely no bias. So the report says they used a triple-blind procedure. That's like the gold standard in serious research. Think about it. The person handling the water, they have no idea which product is the real one. The scientists measuring the results, they don't know either. And get this, even the people doing the initial data analysis are kept in the dark. Nobody knows anything until the very end. So you can really see the level of rigor they were going for here. The study was prospective, which is a fancy way of saying they had the whole plan locked down before they started collecting any data. You add that to having a control group and that triple-blind method we just talked about, and you've got a setup that's designed to be as objective and unbiased as humanly possible. And they didn't just do this a few times. To make sure their data was rock solid, they tested 4 different kinds of water solutions, using multiple methods, checking the pH, the conductivity, and so on. And the total number of measurements they took? 672. That is a ton of data to work with.
Okay, so they've got this super strict, buttoned-up experimental design. They've collected all this data. The big question is, what did they find? Let's get to the good part, the results.
So one of the first big things that jumped out was what they called a neutralizing effect. When they tested slightly acidic water, they saw a strong trend of it moving back towards neutral. But for the alkaline water, the effect was even stronger. It actually reached statistical significance. And that's key. In science, that means the result is so consistent it's extremely unlikely it just happened by chance. But it wasn't just about the pH. The report also found that the water's electrical conductivity went down. Now, this might sound a bit technical, but stick with me, because this particular finding is really important. It's the clue that leads them to their main theory about what's physically happening inside the water itself. They also used another method called spectroscopy, which basically looks at how the water absorbs light. And the results here were kind of mixed, but in a really interesting way. For super acidic water, a pH of 4, the changes were statistically significant. For the others, they saw strong trends. What this hints at is that the product's effect might actually change depending on what state the water is in to begin with. All right, so we've got the raw data, right? Changes in pH, a drop in conductivity, different light absorption, but numbers are just numbers. What does the BION Institute think it all means? This is where we move from the data to the interpretation in their report. Remember that drop in conductivity we mentioned? This is where it comes back in a big way. Based on that finding, the report puts forward a really fascinating idea. They suggest the product is causing a loosening of the water clusters. In simple terms, they're saying it's changing the very structure of how water molecules clump together. And they don't stop there. The report then speculates, okay, if the water is more fluent or less clustered, what could that mean for us? They imagine that this kind of water might pass through our cell membranes more easily. Now, it's important to remember, this is them extrapolating, right? They're connecting a result in a lab to a potential effect in the body.
Okay, to get their next big idea, we need to talk about a core concept in biology: homeostasis. You've probably heard of it. It's just the body's amazing ability to keep everything stable and in balance. Your temperature, your pH, all of it. It's that sweet spot of internal stability.
And this is where they make their biggest interpretive leap. They take that neutralizing effect they saw in the lab, pushing both acidic and alkaline water back to the middle, and they connect it to homeostasis. The thinking in the report is, well, if the product does this to water in a beaker, then theoretically it could support the body's own natural drive to stay in balance.
So, after all that, all the testing, the data crunching, the interpretation, what was the bottom line? What did the BION Institute officially conclude? Their conclusion was pretty straightforward. According to their own report, the differences they measured between the water next to the real product and the water next to the fake one, well, those differences were statistically significant enough to meet their standards for an official certification.
And this is it, the final result of all that work. The BION Institute went ahead and issued this official certificate. It's certificate number 0418, and it formally recognizes what they call an energy influence on water, all based on the data from that triple-blind study we walked through.
So what are we left with? We've just gone through a scientific report that makes some pretty extraordinary claims, but it backs them up with a really rigorous, careful experimental design. It definitely leaves you with a big question to chew on. If results like these can be replicated, what's the next step? How could science even begin to explore these kinds of subtle fields and their potential influence, not just on a glass of water, but on something as complex as a living organism?